Hey folks, I'm Josh.
And I'm Lori, and we're Windy Cape Studios. Welcome to International Association of Woodcarvers.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the International Association of Woodcarvers. Today is Saturday, the 1st of March, 2025. We welcome you all back in on this sunny Saturday. Hopefully it's sunny where you are. It's still a little cool here. We were talking to Josh there a few minutes ago, and it seems to get a little bit warm and then it gets cold again, and we're all ready for some springtime weather. So hopefully wherever you are, it's warm and you're able to get some wood carving done on Saturday afternoon. Today in our meeting, we have Joshua Walters that's coming in from Windy Cape Studios. He's going to be talking to us about making some wood carving bases. So we look forward to hearing from him here in a few minutes. Before we get started with that, I want to tell you about some shows that are coming up in just a couple of weeks. The Wonders in Wood show is going to be happening up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I saw Bob Hershey was on with several of the guys that's going to be up there in Pennsylvania. I'll be up there myself. We've got a table there. We're going to be doing a live stream that Saturday, which will be the 15th. I'll be doing a demonstration on the 16th. That'll be a great show. So if you get a chance, try to come up there. But if you can't, make sure you join us here that Saturday, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, same Zoom. We'll do a live stream from there, and I'll talk about everything that's going on at that show. That's the 50th annual show for them. So should be a pretty big deal. So again, if you're in the area, try to make it up there. And I look forward to seeing you all if you do come out and say hello. Remind you a little bit about the Carving the Rockies show that the CCA is going to be putting on. This will be the 4th annual Carving the Rockies show out in Colorado Springs. But the CCA has been doing a show for 23 years now. I talked to Chris Hammock this morning, and he said the original competition started in Silver Dollar City in Branson, Missouri, I think in 2002. So it's really the 23rd annual show that the CCA's put on, but again, the 4th annual show at the Carving the Rockies. Again, that's September 20th and 21st. You can find out more if you go out on the CCA website, and you can go out there and get signed up for the classes. You can see all the events that are going to be taking place. It's a great show. Again, I've been there every year and look forward to getting back out there in September. So try to come out and join us there if you get a chance. One other show I'll talk about, actually, there's a couple of things I'll talk about. Gathering of Wood Carvers out in Yorkville, Illinois. That's going to be in October this year, October 10th through the 12th. If you get a chance, go out, check out their website, and get signed up to go out to that show. Again, that's another great opportunity to carve with some great carvers, take some classes. I think Joshua's going to be out there, and maybe some other people. So if you get a chance, try to make it out to that. In May, I'll be out at the Rocky Mountain Carvers Roundup, May the 19th through the 23rd. I'll be teaching out there for 5 days. Again, if you're in the area out in Midway, Utah, try to get signed up for that. I look forward to making it out there, and hopefully I'll have some of you all in the classes. If you do come to the classes, make sure you stop by and say hello if you get a chance. Having said all that, I want to welcome everybody that came in from Dave Stetson's class. Before we get started with the meeting, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dave so that he can do words of wisdom.
Today, we're going to talk to you about instructors, teachers, and your wood carving journey. Instructors and teachers and classes that you take, I would like to point out that they do not shorten your journey. You still have to make the journey all the way to the end, wherever that may be. What your instructors and teachers will do is smooth out the road a little bit, take some of the bumps and ruts out of the road, but they will not shorten your trip.
Thank you, Dave. We appreciate that. Like I always say, you got to keep your knife in the wood to be able to improve. Some people think that it's a quick thing. It's not a quick thing. It's like taking any other class for any other subject. You got to learn and do. So thank you for those words of wisdom. We appreciate that. Before I turn it over to Joshua, I want to tell you about an auction that we're doing today. Once again, we have auctions, try to about every week, but sometimes we don't. We have auctions to continue to further these meetings. We have to pay for our Zoom subscription. We got a monthly subscription that we pay, plus a yearly subscription that we pay on top of that. Helvey knives is really good to donate. So we usually auction a Helvey knife. This week, we're going to auction off one of the Windy Cape Studios small tool totes that I've got right here. Joshua can tell more about those, but he makes those along with Lori. I've got one that I use myself that has my tools in it. It's here. It's really a great tool tote to have. So that's going to be part of the auction. And then the other part is a Helvey Roger Stegall autograph signature series knife. It's a 2 1/4 inch blade. Again, Rich Smithson's burnt all the information like he usually does on the signature knives. And then while we were out in Colorado Springs, Roger Stegall signed that. So if any of y'all have taken classes from Roger, you know the tools that he uses. This is a fantastic Helvey knife. Anybody'd be lucky to have this. So again, the auction is for both of these. It's for this and the tool tote. We'll call the auction at the end of the meeting, and the high bid will win. If you want to bid on these, place your bid in the chat. And again, I'll call it at the end of the meeting. And then if you win, you got to stay on so that we can gather your information. We'll get payment through PayPal, and we'll get that shipped out to you this week. So having said all that, again, we want to welcome Joshua Walters from Windy Cape Studios back. He's going to be talking to us today about making bases. He's there in his shop where all the action happens. So Joshua, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Okay. I'm Josh Walters. My wife and I own Windy Cape Studios. She's recording this for us right now. We'll just start out with a quick sales pitch. I'm actually not much of a salesman, but as Blake was talking about, we're going to be auctioning off one of the small tool totes. But I have, we offer 2 different tool totes right now. One that fits in a 5-gallon bucket and the smaller one that fits in a 2-gallon bucket. And they come with a carousel, Lazy Susan on the bottom so you can turn them around and whatnot. This was sort of a collaboration with Matt Altland of Deep Holler Knives. He gave me the idea for these things. We've had some really good feedback on these. There's a lot of people who have been buying them and using them. They're great because they sit on your carving bench and then you just pop them into your bucket, throw the lid on, and go to wherever you're going to carve next. I even have people ordering both sizes, so they'll travel with the small one and they'll leave the large one at their carving bench if they have enough tools for that, because none of us have that many tools, right? The other thing, Plano, I'm not endorsed by them or anything, but I've been using this Plano topper. I put extra knives and medical stuff and whatnot, sharpening equipment that fits in to the 5-gallon buckets. I like to hear back from people about how they're using these. Guy reached out to me the other day. He's putting his in one of those Craftsman roll-along toolboxes, and there's another, Johnny Layton. He bought one of the Yeti buckets. They're a little pricey, but they have all these fancy things because it's Yeti. So he's got all these storage compartments and whatnot. And the large one actually fit into that bucket. So he's been enjoying that. So the other aspect to our business and what we're going to talk about today is bases. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is why would you use a base or a plaque or a pedestal to mount your carving? So even though we're in the business of selling bases, I'm going to show this first. This is a whimsical house that I did, and it doesn't have a base or a plaque on it. Not everything that you create needs a base or a plaque. In fact, I've entered pieces and been told that the base didn't really do anything for them. One of the things that I would encourage everyone is when you're thinking about your carving and your composition, you want to think about everything. So the base becomes integral. So I do a lot of these whimsical houses, and you notice the size difference between the two of these. this one up on a wall with a bunch of ones this size would get lost. So we have this wood burning plaque that I make. And I was looking at it one day and I realized that a carving like this would go great on it. And so when I actually started carving this little whimsical house, I actually planned it to fit on this plaque. And the idea is that this goes up on the wall next to a bunch of other things, and this carving doesn't get lost. This frame here, you can look at this background is kind of like matting on a painting, and then the walnut is framing it. And this just makes your carving stand out more. Now, obviously, we have lots of carvings where we're doing doodles and, you know, those types of carvings. We don't want to make bases for everything. But here's another example. I did these in some Ron Dowdy classes. And, you know, these are fun little carvings. Well, somebody came along, they saw my Civil War soldier, and they wanted to do a commission. And they wanted it to be a little bit more formal. So I have this cowboy and I have this soldier here to kind of show you they're basically the same pattern. But this extra piece of walnut here makes the carving stand out a little bit more, makes it a little bit more formal. It shows people that you're taking some extra time in your presentation. The other thing that this affords you, and I don't have it on this one, the commission piece did, was there's enough space down here to actually do a label. Not many people have reached out to me who have asked for a base, have asked for a label, but you guys might recognize Santa Claus from, yeah, there's the label down there. You might recognize Santa Claus from the first time that I did International Association of Woodcarvers. I was talking a little bit about how I was planning out how I was doing this base. So with Santa Claus, I did this with in one of Chris Hammock's design classes, and it was a lot of fun to do, and this Santa Claus would be great on its own. But I felt like he was missing something because he's sitting here with his earphones listening to tunes. So I decided that I wanted to actually put him into a scene, and I started thinking about this as I was carving it in that class. Now, it took me about 3 or 4 years before I actually realized this, but, you know, I've placed him in a scene where he's got his record player and his records. He's, you know, there's some hardwood flooring here, this rope rug. All of this is framed nicely with the walnut, and then I've got a label on it. And so this kind of shows you all the different things that we can do here at Windy Cape. One of the things about this flooring is actually recessed into the base, and that just gives you a nice clean line here. So there's lots of different ways of making bases. But you need to keep in mind when I really believe that you need to keep in mind while you're designing your carving, the whole picture. Base, plaque, pedestal, no base, plaque, or pedestal, how you're going to paint it, natural finish, how you're carving it. The whole carving, everything becomes a package, and it really shows when you go to shows and you're looking at other people's carvings, whether or not these things were afterthoughts, like if the painting or the base were an afterthought. Now, I've been making bases for years. This was, I don't know, this is almost 10 years ago that I carved this. And when I carved this, I did not have very many tools. So this is all bark. It's actually made out of like 11 different pieces of bark. And the base itself, if I turn this up here this way, this is a freeform base. So what I want to do today is go over just kind of an introductory on how to make bases. For those of you who have not tried this, the barrier to entry is not that steep. I was doing this with basically 3 tools. a router, actually 4 tools, a bandsaw, a router, an edge sander, and a random orbit sander, and then a lot of elbow grease. So we're going to talk a little bit about how I got started making the bases, and over time, especially when we got into the business, I've added tools, changed my processes, and actually I could probably spend the entire weekend just telling you guys how to make different styles of bases, what tools to use, what tools are easier than others, because sometimes you can make a base 3 different ways. So we're going to start with sort of that freeform base, because this is, I think all the basics of how to make this base apply to every other base that I would show you how to do. And I'm actually contemplating going into more detail and offering a class on how to make bases in the future. We were actually talking with Blake and Stetson and Mr. Levy there before the beginning of the show. This is something that's kind of on my radar that I'm developing. So you got to start with wood. If you don't have a lot of equipment, if you've never done this before, what you don't want to do is you don't want to go out and get rough cut wood. So this wood is rough cut here, here, on the edges. You don't want that, because the barrier to entry is the expense in the tools. Go to your lumber supplier, and I'm not talking about a big box store. I'm talking about the lumber supplier that has walnut, cherry, exotics, other native woods. You want to go to them. I've used wood from the big box stores. I've seen people put their carvings on wood from the big box stores. It's not as nice a quality of wood. A lot of times it's not dried correctly. A lot of these lumber suppliers are going to give you a higher quality wood. Now, it is wood, so things go wrong. You have a nice flat piece of wood, you start working with it, you go away for the evening, you come back the next day and it's worked on you. That's what wood does. It doesn't happen as often as you would think, though. So when you go to these lumber suppliers, what you're looking for is a lot of times they offer you wood that's planed on 2 sides. So this is planed on the front and the back. The edges are still rough. This is good enough for our purposes. They'll do something called skip planing. Skip planing does not necessarily give you an exactly flat board. However, the board, for instance, could be twisted. So from here to here, it could actually twist some. That's okay, because most of our bases for our caricature carvings, our wildlife carvings, etc., you're only going to use a small section of the board. And because you're using a small section of the board, this side and this side are going to be pretty much coplanar and flat. Now, if you're going to make a base for, say, a carousel horse, where you're making a base that's like this big, you're going to need tools to make certain that that base is flat before you make it. So on these, if I was doing a freeform base, I'm just going to mark out where I want my base and place my carving on there and any scenery and everything. And I'm going to work out for myself how big this needs to be. Once I've done all that and I've got the design parameters, you're going to add space for your routed profile. That's what the router's for. Once you have all of that, you have a line. You're going to take it to the bandsaw, and you're going to cut on the outside of that line. So when I first started this, I had the bandsaw. Somebody gave me a bandsaw, and I needed a way to make, once you cut it, I needed a way to make these sides basically square to the 2 planes, and also get out all the rough cutting from the bandsaw. So the way that I did that was I used, this is Rigid's oscillating edge sander. So by oscillating, it goes up and down, and that does a couple of different things. So when you're sanding, the thing that hurts you the most is heat. Heat and buildup of sawdust in the grit on the sandpaper. So you can see where this sands. The longer the belt, the less heat you'll have. But this machine, I've had this machine for 12 years. I got it off of like Craigslist, so I got it pretty cheap. I have used this machine for probably 90% of the bases that are not pedestals that I have made over the last 10 or 12 years that I've been making bases. We've only been doing it for about 4 years. It'll be our 4-year anniversary at the Lancaster show here in 2 weeks. But this machine gets used all the time. Now, this is also a spindle sander. So what this allows you to do is when you're doing freeform bases, because you have both an edge sander and a spindle sander, this unit comes out, the spindle goes right there, the spindle also oscillates. You can sand to your line all the way around your base. Now, one of the things that you need to do when you are designing your base is you need to be cognizant of the tools that you're using. So if you are using a spindle sander, you need to make certain that any sort of divot that you have, sharp divots, will fit in where that tool goes. This is especially important when you're talking about the router bits. So this tool's been amazing for me. I do have a spindle sander sitting next to it, a dedicated spindle sander. That is because I was still working on a project where I needed a bigger spindle, and it's only 1.5 inches longer, but that actually makes a huge difference. And then going back and forth, just having the dedicated was worth it for the business, but it's not necessarily something that I would suggest for somebody who's getting started with making bases. This machine, Rigid is not the only manufacturer that makes these. There's, I believe, Harbor Freight has one. I think Rycon has one. There's probably some other manufacturers out there. And these are relatively inexpensive. If you go to more of a professional model in the oscillating belt sander / spindle sander, you're looking at like $2,000. But this machine, I've actually been on woodworking threads where they're sort of knocking this machine, and this has just been a workhorse for me over the years. So that's how I get the sides smooth. Now, notice on this base, I've got this little divot here. If you imagine this as an exaggeration of what you're trying to do here, most of the time, this is a planned divot. But when you are sanding these edges, this is before, let me turn it around. You're sanding these edges before you do your routed profile. You want this to be perfectly smooth, and any transition from a round to a straight line or between different curves, you want it to be smooth. So you see me running my fingers along here. I am always doing this to make certain that I don't have little divots. If I have a divot, it shows up in your routed profile. Even small divots show up in your routed profile. If I'm judging your piece and it's down to your piece or somebody else's, you both have bases, and me and the other judges, we can't figure out which one should win, I'm going to start looking for those little imperfections. And I know that I'm not the only one, because this is something that I have learned through the customers that I supply, especially in the bird carving world. if they have two carvings that are just fantastic carvings and they don't know which one to choose, they start judging the base. And they don't care that you bought the base or that you made it yourself. They care that you're putting a quality base on that carving, and then that base is is integral to your composition. So the other thing about this, and I did let me grab one other thing, sorry about that. So I mentioned that when I started out that I did not have a table saw. So how did I make something with a slight curve and straight lines? Well, it's an edge sander. I sand to the line. The other thing that you can use is you can use a hand plane. So when you're sanding, now one of the things that these belt sanders will do is they will scallop this. In some cases, it doesn't matter. You won't be able to tell. If you can tell, just use a hand plane. A block plane will do it. Put it in a vise and shave it off. Use the sander to get down to your line, and then use the block plane to get to that real straight section. So this machine's been very, very handy, and I don't know what I'm going to do if it ever dies. So coming back over here.
Hey, Josh, quick question. Somebody wants to know if you're going to be selling bases at the Charlotte show.
Yes, so our plan is to be at Lancaster. And at Lancaster, I'm also going to be talking more about making bases. It will probably be a little bit of a different of a discussion than it is today, just because there I'm at the show, there's no tools in front of me and whatnot, but I'll be doing a demo on Sunday afternoon there. And then we'll be down in Charlotte, we're selling bases, we'll also have the tool totes. Later on in the year, I'm scheduled to teach at the Gathering of Woodcarvers. That'll be a whimsical house class. I'm scheduled to teach at North Alabama Woodcarvers right around the time that they're having their show. So we plan on being at their show where we'll have bases and tool totes again. That class would be my candlestick class. And then the weekend after that is scheduled to teach at Leaper's Fork, Tennessee, doing whimsical houses. Okay, so the next step, you have it all cut out.
Josh, I got a question real quick.
Sure.
The piece you got there in your hand, the multi-level, it was a multi-level base there right behind you that you were showing us. It has, it has several, is that several layers, or do you sand those little edges into it, into one solid piece?
Okay, this is the next thing.
All right.
I'm looking, I'm not looking at the camera, I'm looking at the computer. Okay, so the next thing, when you have your base cut out and you've got your edges sanded, you're going to use a router. Now, if you're just getting started, I started with a trim router, and this is the same rigid trim router Mike Panders had a couple weeks ago on International Association. I ended up with a couple of these because I really, really like them. And at our old house, my shop was, it was really small. I didn't have a full-size router, I think, until we came over here. And so I ended up with multiple of these. Now, what I don't like about these is I don't like the plates on the bottom. So I found online, and I don't know that this guy is in business anymore, but you can see that this plate is a lot bigger. And the reason why I like the bigger plate is you're going to put this down on the piece and you're going to go around the edge. This helps you keep it from rocking on the side of your piece. Now, what does a router do for those of you who aren't into woodworking? A router spins a router bit. So this is a router bit. And it's going to spin this at a high RPM, and you notice that there's a bunch of cutters on it. There's also this bearing up here. What we're doing is, you see there's a profile here. This bearing rests here, And as it spins, it cuts, and it cuts the profile. Now, this router bit doesn't match this profile, so don't let that confuse you, but the principle is the same. This is going around cutting the profile, okay? So how to do that when you don't have a router table or a lot of equipment? You buy yourself an inexpensive trim router. You can get trim routers on Facebook Marketplace for, you know, $50. You can go to Harbor Freight and get one for 50 or 60 bucks. You go to yard sales. If you can get the larger plate, that's good. I use this shelf liner. It's a rubber material. And you notice, like, I can push the base around, but if I put pressure on it, I can't move this base. So when you go to route this, you're going to put this down, you put down pressure, and you go around the edge, and you follow the edge with the bearing. Remember the bearing on the top of this. That's going to give you your routed profile. If you have the money, or you don't think that's safe enough for you, this is the safest way. So this is a router table. The router's underneath. Here's the router bit. And what I do is I turn it on, I come up here, and I push this through this way to get my routed profile. This is a little bit of protection to keep your hands out of the way. This I would not be without. This is a gripper block by Microjig. There's other things that are on the market as well. It's got a rubber pad on the bottom. This helps you hold on to this. Now, here's what happens when you don't hold on to it right. You end up with this. What happened here is, I don't know, maybe I readjusted where the gripper block was, and it caught the blade on the router bit. It tore all this out, and it literally shot this across the shop. That's going to happen when you're using routers, so you just need to be cognizant of, you know, the direction that you're using. A router bit really only cuts in one direction. If you cut in the other direction, it's actually easier to do this. But today I'm not really talking about safety or even really how to use the tools. I'm just trying to get you, trying to give the backstory of where I started, how you can get started. Along this journey, you need to take the time to figure out how to use the tools, what safety precautions you need to do, and all of that. If I do end up doing a class, I'll go more into depth on all of those types of details. So you use your router bit to create the routed profile. So the question was whether or not this was a layered base. Neither of these are layered. These are single pieces of wood. I do make, since we had that question, I make these other inlaid bases. And what these are is, here's my Santa Claus example. So I'll provide you with the base that has a basswood insert. And you can take your carving and you attach your carving to the basswood insert, but you carve your basswood insert and then you attach it to the base. I have a number of different styles. This is an octagon with a circular portion. So you're carving your flooring, your habitat, whatever you want out of this. Here's an oval one. And this one, I had a CCA artist order a couple of these. This is an island or a pork chop. It's kind of kidney bean shaped. This has a very thick piece of basswood. And the nice thing about that is that, let's say you're doing a hunting scene and there's a rabbit hiding from the hunter. Well, you can actually carve down into the base, and if we make the base and the basswood thick enough, you can actually have the scene go below ground, so to speak. So there's a lot that you can do with this, and I can make these as thick as you want them. So these would be your layered or your inlaid pieces. But going back to this is just a single piece of wood with a router profile that you use the router to create. Now, once you've got your routed profile, you need to sand it. So the next thing that you have to buy is random orbit sander. I bought this one. This is Makita. I don't remember how much it cost, but it was a little bit pricey for random orbit sanders. I think it was around $100. The reason why I bought it was because I had a bunch of cheap random orbit sanders, and the last one lasted all of 3 months. Putting a little bit of money into these is not a bad idea if you're a woodworker. Now, if you're just doing a few bases for your carvings during the year, buying a cheap one you can get away with. The more you make these, the more you want a better product. And this one's a pretty good product, but it also puts your hand to sleep. So I use, I'm gonna get flack for this, but I use Festool, which is expensive. I bought it used. This does not put your hand to sleep, and the dust collection is integral. The dust collection on this is fantastic. I wear a dust mask when I use this one. I don't wear a dust mask when I use this one. Probably still should, just in case, but the dust collection on these is fantastic. And when you're sanding 4 hours straight, your hand and your arm will go numb using some of these other random orbit sanders, but not with the Festools. And there's Mirka and a couple of others. Again, if you're just getting started, one of these is fine, or even one of the cheaper ones. A note about sandpaper. There are proper ways of using sandpaper. I start at 80 grit almost no matter what. Sometimes I go lower than that, 60, even 40 grit. It depends on what the wood looks like. This wood actually looks pretty smooth, so a lot of people would start with like 100 grit, 120 grit. I wouldn't start there. I start at 80 grit at the very least, and I do that because through trial and error and many times of starting over, I have found that I will get to 180 grit and then 220 grit, and I realize that there's scratches in there that the 120 grit never got out. The purpose behind the different grits in sandpaper is to remove scratches. Sandpaper creates scratches, but it's the whole process of sanding or polishing is to make the scratches smaller as you go. So start with the larger scratches, put them in there intentionally, and use the proper go to the next proper grit. So the general rule of thumb is, and I did not know this for years, I spent way too much time sanding. The most efficient way to start to sand is you start with like 80 grit. And the next grit that you use should be no more than 50% of the grit that you just used. So if you start at 80 grit, half of that's 40. You don't want to go more than 120. So don't go to 150. You would think that the manufacturers of sandpaper would give you the grits so that you weren't accidentally skipping steps, but that's not how they do it. You can find sandpaper that's 40, 60, 80, 100, 120, 150, 180. I use 60, 80, 120, 180, 220, 320. I very rarely go up to 320. When you're sanding, take a pencil. Actually, go to Hobby Lobby and buy one of these. I don't know where my other one is, so I'm going to pull this one out. This is just a graphite stick. So you can see that I can write with the whole side. When you're sanding, use a graphite stick. Do this and sand until that is gone. Then move on to your next grit. So I would start here with 80 grit. I would remove all of this. Then I would go back and I would remark the piece and go to 120 grit. Hobby Lobby or Michaels for these back in the drawing section. By doing this, what you're doing is you're making certain that you don't leave the sander in one spot for too long. As soon as it's erased, keep going to the next spot. Okay? Don't sit in one spot for too long because it'll sand and make divots. Now, the next piece of advice that I have is these. These are sanding sponges and sanding blocks. These are relatively inexpensive at a place like Woodcraft or Rockler. I don't know if they sell these in the big box stores anymore. I've got one for every grit, so I have them labeled. But you can use these around the sides if there's a spot that the edge sander didn't get right. Or if you don't want to buy the edge sander, you can do the edges this way. I don't recommend it. It takes a long time, but you can do it. As far as the routed profile, you want to zoom in on this? So I found these company in Gettysburg, and you can see that sort of conforms to this profile here. And so I can sand that really lightly, but I'm doing work, and I'm able to get it to conform and get down into the crevices. I'll at least do 80 grit by hand before I ever use a power tool to sand the routed profiles. With the number of bases that I do that have routed profiles, I do have a means of machine sanding these, but I still start with the 80 grit because when I'm using the 80 grit with the machine, it goes too fast and I end up losing part of the profile. So if you really want your base to pop, the routed profile, the grain will follow the routed profile through, and you'll be able to see all that once you've sanded it. The best way to do that is by hand. So there's a company near Gettysburg called Super Grit. I think it's supergrit.com. They sell these and they're really inexpensive. I buy a whole bunch of them at a time. They come in different grits. So you can hand sand this to your heart's content, get it nice and smooth. And you want to go up to about 220 grit before you finish it. Finishing products.
Before you get to that, there was a question.
There was a question?
There's a question about the edge.
We have one person that's asking what the thickness of a typical board would be for you to do a roof out, or I'm sorry, a base.
I don't like to go below 3/4 of an inch. So I mentioned earlier that wood warps. Okay, so how is it that we have wooden furniture? If you dry wood correctly, it will stay relatively straight. And if you saw it correctly and dry it correctly, you have an even better chance of it staying straight. So we trust our lumber suppliers to hopefully have it sawn and dried correctly. It's wood. Right now, our humidity level's below 20% up here in Pennsylvania right now because it's the middle of winter. If I send something down to New Orleans right now, it could warp on you. Now, if it's dried correctly and finished correctly, it shouldn't. But if you ever get a base from me and it warps, just let me know. I'll make good on it. It's what wood does. part of what I do to eliminate that issue is the thinner the wood is, the more likely it's going to be to warp. So I usually start 3/4 to 7/8 of an inch. This is This is 7/8 of an inch. The guy that I get my wood from, he usually skip planes it to about 7/8 of an inch. So that's usually where I start. If it warps at all while I'm making it, I may flatten it more. But if it gets underneath 3/4 of an inch and it's a larger base like this, I probably won't sell it. It'll probably end up either in my scrap pile or in our wood stove, heating our place. The larger the base, the more likely that you're going to have problems with warping and cupping and all of that. So like if you do a carousel, you do a base for a carousel horse, I would actually do a glue up in that case, and I would be doing boards where the grain is going different directions to sort of minimize that. But that would be something that we would go over if I was teaching in class. It's more akin to making a tabletop if you were making furniture. Most of the bases that I make really aren't much larger than this that we sell. I mean, this is maybe 10 inches across each way. We have a few that are up to 13 inches. I made one for somebody recently that was like 20 inches by 14. So the larger the base is, the more thickness I like to have. It just makes the board more stable. I don't know all the physics behind it, but I assume that it has to do with just the volume of wood that is soaking up the moisture. Even once you put a coat of finish on these are still going to exchange moisture with the air. It's just going to be greatly diminished. Any more questions? How many?
Yeah, one other question. Mitch is wanting to know about whether or not you can use a router to create a beveled frame for a deep relief scene that's as thick as 2 inches and as large as 12 by 12.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's not a problem. There's a lot of things that you can do with routers, and routers come in different sizes. So for those of you who are not woodworkers, this is a trim router. I don't know how many horsepower it has, but if it has a 1/3 horsepower or if it has a 1/2 horsepower, I'd be surprised. This is a 2.5 horsepower router. You can use this by hand. You can actually do the same thing that I showed you earlier. These are a little bit more dangerous in your hand for certain operations, but they're also safer for others because it's a heavier piece of machinery. If you're starting out, I suggest starting with the trim router and understanding how to use a router before you move on to one of these. And then they make these even bigger. They make dedicated units that are the size of this table here. There's actually 2 tables here. But like the size of this table, they're called shapers. They usually come 3 to 5 horsepower. And they have actually been known to kill people. They launch things across the room at high velocity. So I don't have one of those. I've been asked which power tool scares me the most, and I just look at the person who says that and I say yes. There's not a tool in this shop that I don't have the utmost fear and respect for, because we are wood carvers. We like to have our digits in place, and that is usually where most of the accidents happen. So definitely understand your safety precautions. Rockler and Rockler Woodcraft, Highland Woodworkers. I don't know about Klingsport, but a lot of woodworking shops have demos and classes. It's a great way to get into it. There's usually you can't throw a rock without finding somebody who dabbles in woodworking either. There probably one of your neighbors knows more about tools than you do if you're starting out. So find somebody to help you out, watch some YouTube videos, get to know your tools, and get to use safe practices. So the final thing, how am I doing on time?
We're good. We're about 7 till, so we're good.
Okay. I'm gonna talk about finishes. So I use an oil-based finish. There are two finishes that I use primarily: Osmo wood wax finish and Danish oil. Okay. So what's the difference between these two? Danish oil is an oil, and I believe that it's tongue oil that's been thinned. Okay, this is, you can get this at a big box store. It's inexpensive. It makes a nice finish. There's nothing wrong with using this. I went away from this on any of the flat bases because when you get into the end grain on the wood, so the grain's going this way, so this is end grain right here that's been exposed by the router bit. The Danish oil will soak in over time. And because the Danish oil soaks in over time, you get a difference in sheen between the face grain, which is over here, and the end grain, which is over here. By adding the wood wax product, I believe it actually has wax in it. The wood wax product coats the end grain a lot better. And this product you can brush on and wipe it off. You don't want excess on your wood, but you brush it on and you don't have to do much to it. This product, you really want to rub into the finish. So let me give me 1 second. You want to use a lint-free cloth, so don't cut up your old t-shirts. This is a lint-free cloth, so when you're applying this, when you are applying this, you're going to rub this in. I'm actively rubbing this into the finish. Now, it doesn't take too much, but what I don't want is I don't want a lot of oil sitting on the top. So if I've got, I don't know if you can see this, but you see how shiny that is as I roll it around in the light? That means that there's too much oil there. I will definitely, anytime you have that, you want to wipe it off. For whatever reason, yeah, so now as I turn it around in the light, it's no longer shining. For whatever reason, there are a lot of manufacturers of these oil-based finishes that tell you to flood the product. What flooding is you just put the oil on and then you wipe it off later. The problem with that is you can have something, you can have it come back out of the wood grain later. So thin coats are best. They don't take a long time to apply. With the Osmo, you're actually going to rub it in. Now the Danish oil, you don't really have to rub in. It's much thinner than the Osmo, but you rub it in, and what it does is it makes your grain pop. And I'll do 2 to 3 coats depending upon how the wood looks. And as I judged some shows and even just walking around looking at other people's carvers, where people are screwing up on their bases or doing very well is the screw up would be having a little imperfection that shows in your profile. Doing really good would be taking the time to eliminate that perfection or imperfection, or even redoing your base, which I know sounds like a lot of work, but sometimes you need to do that. As far as the oil-based finishes, there's a lot of people who use oil-based finishes because they're easy. You don't need a spray gun like you do with lacquer. You can get lacquer in a rattle can, in a spray can. But lacquer in a spray gun is actually easier than in a rattle can. You want to make certain that you get a nice even coat of your finish when you are moving it around in the light, and you want to use raking light, and you literally want to do this. And a lot of times I finish these here in the shop, and I've got these bright overhead lights. These bright overhead lights are actually not great for finishing. I do the finishing in here. I take them into our kitchen in the morning when I've got raking light from the sun, and I do this, and a bunch of them usually end up coming back out here, and I redo them. Now, I'd say redo them, I touch them up. So how do you touch them up if you get a shiny spot and it dries on you? Scotch-Brite. Trying to think where I have some. Scotch-Brite will get rid of those shiny spots. The other thing that I do is I use 600 grit wet dry sandpaper, and I will do this on pedestals. I will take 600 grit wet dry sandpaper and put a little bit of oil on the wet dry sandpaper, and you polish it at that 600 grit, and that'll actually make it'll make for a nice consistent sheen, and it'll look fantastic. I also do that on the pedestals on the end grain. I'll usually hit the side grain, but I spend time on the end grain because it really makes it pop. So those are, do we have any questions about finishing or actually anything that I've gone over?
Actually, more questions about the bases. For one of your 3-inch square bases, does the 3-inch include the routed edge?
So we went back and forth when we first started. When we first started putting these on the website, Lori was measuring them one way and I was measuring them another. What we ended up deciding upon was we're trying to give you, unless we specify otherwise on the website, we're trying to give you the workspace. So the workspace is, in the case of a routed base, it's going to be from the inside to the inside, and the inside to the inside on the length. On a flat base, do I have a good example? Yes. So on a flat base, this one has a chamfered profile. It's slightly on an edge. We'll give you right across the top.
Just about.
So the actual size of the base, if it has a profile,
Hey, Josh, go ahead and unmute your computer real quick. Josh, can you hear me? Go ahead and unmute your computer real quick. I had somebody coming in and I clicked to mute them and it switched over to your phone real quick. Sorry about that.
you got me now?
Yes, sir. Apologize for that. You're talking about the base, your width on your bases.
Okay. So we're doing the works, on the website, we're doing the work surface. So that for recess base, it would be these 2 dimensions where the recess is. On a base that's flat, it would be across the top. And if this wasn't a circle, it would be those 2 dimensions, okay? If it's a routed profile, so the interior of this is 4 7/8, the actual measurement on this is almost 6 1/4 across the width. So we'll tell you on the website if the size of the base, if the type of base adds significant width. The chamfered ones, so like this is like 5.5 inches in diameter. But the overall footprint is about 6 inches. So it adds 1/2 inch. We tell you all those dimensions on the website. If you're still wondering, obviously you can reach out to us. It's windycapestudios@gmail.com. And if there is something that's not on the website, I have not put these up there, which I need to do for the caricature carvers and even for the wildlife carvers. I don't have Tupelo on hand, but if somebody wanted me to get a hold of a Tupelo and inlay it like this to do something with a wildlife carving, I'd be absolutely happy to accommodate that. We're here to help you realize your carving. So, everything that I went over today, if you already make your own bases, that's fine with us. There are certain services that maybe you can't do with your own tools. We might have the tools to do it, like these recesses and doing the inlay. We have the tools to do that. Not everybody has that. We're here to help however we can. If you do your own bases and you want templates to do template routing, just shoot me an email. And I make those on the laser. Just real quick, since we've still got a little bit of time, what template routing is customer sent me a pattern. And it was a hand-drawn pattern. And I put it on a piece of plywood. And that is how I made this freeform base that I've been talking about the whole time. I will double stick tape this to this, and then I use a flush trim bit in the router to basically make this shape. So what that allows me to do is I have different patterns for different bases. So this one here, here's a pattern for it. I double stick tape this to the piece of wood. I cut close to where the template is. And then I take it to the router. I use a flush trim bit, which flush trims it. I get this exact base. Now, you notice that this template has a hole in the center. That's because I use what's called a pin router to make this recess. So this goes down on top of a router bit that comes up underneath. And then there's a pin that comes down from the top, and I can follow the outline and hog out that material. That's the old way of doing it. Nowadays, we have CNC machines to do that. Lori and I have not invested in a CNC machine yet. It's on the list of tools that I don't have. For those of you with tool acquisition syndrome, you know how much I'm itching to get one.
Hey, Josh, another question from the chat. And referring back to the base that had the 11 pieces of bark on it. They're wanting to know what you use to attach the carvings to the base.
Okay, so there are a couple different ways. This one has a bunch of screws. And I'll be honest with you, people like this carving, and I like taking it to show it, especially since I teach whimsical houses. This was a lot of fun to make, and I would love to be at a venue where we could attempt to make one of these, but it takes about a week's worth of work. This piece, being 11 different pieces of bark, has broken I don't know how many times. I don't like the screws on the bottom, but it was something that the person who taught me how to do this suggested. I now use dowel rod, and I also use if the piece is very, very thin. So dowel rod, you can use these center finders. So these are dowel center finders. And what they do is you drill a hole. So this is like for 1/4 inch. hole. You drill a hole and you stick this down. And then what you can do is, once it's in a hole, you put another piece down like this. And it makes a divot. So these dowel centers. Just making certain that I got the right dowel and tenon pins, that's what these are. Those allow you to use standard size dowel rod. If you get down real small though, like if you've got a caricature that's got a cane, which I just did one, the cane itself was all one piece, like the caricature and the cane was all one piece, but the cane was very fragile because it didn't touch the shoe of the caricature. What I did in that case was I used piano wire. Piano wire is really thin. You can get it at Hobby Lobby and Michael's. Just a little 1-inch piece. You drill a really tiny hole in the bottom of the cane, drill a really tiny hole in your base. You feed the piano wire in there with some epoxy and you're good to go. It's actually really, really strong. Piano wire. Where would I put it? It's not over here. I'm not sure where I put it, but it probably wouldn't actually show up in that on the camera. It's that thin. You actually need to be really careful with it because if you go to like push it into a hole, it will go into your finger just like a needle will.
One other question, somebody wants to know if the small bases typically are end grain or edge grain.
Small bases are end grain or edge grain?
Yes.
Not sure I follow. They have both.
Hey, Rob, if you want to unmute, you're welcome to ask there.
Yeah, I was just wondering if if you have a small 4x4 block and you're making a 4x4 base, if you're just lopping off the block and so it's all end grain that's exposed, or if you're actually cutting it from the side so it's like an edge grain, it may be a little more, I guess, stout.
If I'm doing a flat base, I'm taking it out of a board like this. When I get into pedestals, if it's this is your long grain here, your end grain is up here. So I get sticks of wood that are typically for making legs for furniture applications. So here's a piece of cherry that I make pedestals out of. I'll take this over to the miter saw and I'll cut them down to about 4 inches and I'll get a bunch of them. This is for making cabriole legs in if you're doing furniture making. And these are, you know, it's hard to find these because they take a long time to dry in the kiln because they're so thick. Now, if you're talking about burls, I can't answer your question at all because inside of a burl, what makes all this fancy grain, and it's not actually showing up the greatest, but what makes all this fancy grain is the fact that the grain is going 15 different directions. So with burls, I'll have end grain burls, I'll have face grain burls. I mean, they're pedestals, so you have both. No matter what you make, you always end up with both face and edge grain. But when you're doing the flat stuff, you want your, I mean, you know, this comes out of something like that. This is all face grain.
You've got a small one.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. Do we have any other questions for Joshua today?
I don't mind talking shop, so if you want.
Hey, Josh,
Yeah.
great presentation. I love what you do. I love your carvings. I love what you're doing with the bases. I just had a thought. If people wanted to screw from underneath like you did, and I know why that irks you now. But what about you dadoing the bottom like you do the tops for the inlaid basswood? That would allow us to countersink and screw what we need to do, and then that plate would be your signature plate, would cover the screws after. Too much work, too much thought?
Yeah, that is a lot of work. And honestly, you don't know where the person's going to screw it, right? So,
Right.
with this one, you know, if I was to route all of this, that's 10 minutes of work, 10 to 15 minutes worth of work, where I only need these 2 screw holes.
Right.
It also lessens the integrity.
Yeah, and it's also going to thin out your board, so it's more likely to warp and whatnot.
Yeah.
I forgot to show you guys this guy. This is another Chris Hammock design class. It's kind of funny. We were talking with Stetson and Blake and them, and I mentioned what I was going to be talking about today, and Stetson said, you know, you don't want your base to be there. You don't want your base to just look like it was keeping your carving upright. So this carving, this piece of basswood down here was not part of the carving, and this carving itself can't stand on its own. So there's a little bit of irony here in that I did actually make a base just to keep my carving upright. But I did put a lot of thought into this, and this has, I don't know, probably this one. So this has 2 parallel sides, and then small radiuses on the ends. I did this with that edge sander, and these sides are fairly straight. I did not have a table saw at the time that I put this together. So that edge sander is amazing. And if, like I said, if you're getting into this and you want to try this out, don't think that you need to go out and buy every piece of equipment. In fact, if you're getting into it and you want to talk about what equipment to buy, in what order to get it, you know, depending upon the style base that you're making, you might be surprised at what answers I give you. For instance, woodworkers will tell you that your table saw is the heart of your wood shop. I absolutely have to have a table saw for this business. I don't use it that much. It gets used when it has to be used. The octagons that we create, those are done on the table saw, but you can actually use a sander to create those. So if I was teaching a class, I'd be showing you different methods that I know of making these bases. There's actually multiple ways to make most of these bases. If all you ever want to do is show off a single caricature, or maybe you want to do small birds, a lathe is not a bad investment. It is, I mean, it limits you to doing round bases. Well, actually, it doesn't completely limit you to doing round bases. There's other things that you can do, but yeah.
Hey Josh, I pray that you never have to use it, but I'm glad to see that you do have it. Can you talk a little bit about the saw stop, and as a business owner, does it give you a reduction on your insurance at all?
No, it doesn't give us a reduction on our insurance. It might if we had employees. I don't know. I mean, we employ ourselves and a cat. And the cat's mostly a freeloader. I love the machine. I had an old Delta. The Delta had no safety features. It didn't have a riving knife. I had that thing kick back on me a couple of times. You can still have kickback on the saw stop, but I've got some nice. I have there's Jessam guides that hold your wood down, that are a good safety improvement. to cutting on the table saw. But we have a family member who hurt themselves on a table saw, not horribly badly, but they did lose part of a finger. That really made me rethink what I was doing. So like I said, all of these tools, there's a lot of respect and fear for them. We got the saw stop used and I am happy with the machine. I've never had it go off on me. For those of you who don't know what a saw stop is, basically the blade retracts if you touch it while it's moving. And it retracts fast enough that you don't lose your finger. You'll still get cut, but it's minimal. So I like having it because I don't use it a huge amount in this business. So it's one of those things where you're trying to hurry up and get things done. Having the extra safety there is awesome. I wish they had it for routers. I wish they had it for miter saws. They don't have that technology embedded into those other types of tools. Because sometimes you're just tired and you're trying to get through an order. This is not our primary job, but we both have day jobs. So, you know, if you're trying to push through an order, having that extra level of safety is just, it's nice to have that. It's a nice peace of mind.
Yeah.
What were the little center finder things that you had, and where did you get them?
Dell and tenon pins. You can just get them from Amazon. You should also, they're general brand. So I believe Lowe's and Home Depot both have them. You go in there and you ask them for the center finders for dowels and dowel pins, and they'll know, they should know what you're talking about. Those are fantastic for finding things. And if we do a class, I'll go into more mounting options and whatnot. So what other kinds of questions do you guys got?
Well, Josh, we're at 20 after 4, so I'll go ahead and stop you. Looks like the questions in the chat have slowed down. I just want to say thank you all for your donations, for the support that you give International Association of Woodcarvers, for your friendship. We've gotten together a few times, and I look forward to getting together up in Lancaster here in a few weeks. If you are looking for a great tool tote, or you need a base, or if you want to buy a carving, reach out to Joshua and Lori, and they'll be happy to help you. I'll go ahead and call the auction. Dean Irvin, if you will stay on, we will go ahead and collect your money and get these items out to you, and we appreciate your support as well. Tell you a little bit about our schedule coming up next Saturday. As I talked about earlier, Rod Gatlin will be on. He'll be talking about the upcoming Charlotte show that's happening in April. I'll be up in Lancaster on the 15th of March, so I'll be broadcasting live from up there. If you can't join us, make sure you tune in on here. And then I saw Mike Bloomquist was on today. He's going to be presenting on the 22nd of March. So look forward to having Mike back. If you know anybody who wants to come on and present, please reach out to me and Dave Levy. We'll get you signed up, get you a date, and make sure that we have some great material that we can present to the group. I just want to say thank you all again for joining us today. This has been the International Association of Woodcarvers, and we will see you all next Saturday, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you all. It's fancy. That's nice.
That's good. That's nice.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, we're recording, so whenever you want to go, it'll be up to you and how many ever takes you want to do, like we always say, and have fun with it. Enjoy yourselves.
Hey folks, this is Josh Walters and
whoever this is, whoever this girl is there next to me.
This person over here.
Hey folks, this is Josh.
And Lori, and we're from Let's rehearse this first.
We don't know what we're saying.
Rehearse, yeah, that's fine. You can rehearse.
He wants outtakes anyway.
All right.
Yeah, it's all
That's it.
outtakes. It's all for later in the
And
video.
then-
It's all
and then
fun.
we're Windy Cave Studios. And
Yes,
then
you
welcome
can
to-
announce Windy Cave
Okay.
Studios.
All right.
Hey folks, I'm Josh.
And I'm Lori, and we're from Windy Cape Studios. Welcome to International Association of Woodcarvers. You were supposed to join me on that.
Oh, I was? Okay. One more time.
Take
One more
next.
time.
I will say my name and this, and then together we will say,
She's the boss.
That's right.
Hey folks, I'm Josh.
and I'm Lori, and we're Windy Cape Studios. Welcome to
the
International Association
of Woodcarvers.
The Interna-
Hey, Seller is speaking foreign tongues, so we're okay. Yeah.
Is it the international or is it just international?
It's just international.
Okay.
All right. Is that good enough?
That's good enough.
Oh yeah, I can use that.